HDMI input? And the answer is yes. A big yes. Whatever goggle you get in the future, if you want to have any chance of stepping out of an ecosystem, having a HDMI input is big, which is why that is a serious limitation of this goggle. At the moment, not only do we not have a VRX with a P1 digital, you can only get it on here, and you can't even, if this had a different VRX, even a HDMI input, imagine if you could then feed, I don't know, a different VRX on the front. Put a warp style VRX or something like that on the front is the key thing. So someone's saying ideally a 100 FPS HDMI input. Digital Mojo says, I almost went with those HD Zeros but settled with the DJI M3s and I'm very happy. I built a 5-inch drone and used the O4 Light Air unit and it works great. Yeah. And you should also buy the goggle that you like the system of, you think you will fly primarily. So that is probably something to consider as well. So do not buy a goggle straight on the fact of like just because it's got a VRX. That's what I want to do if I'm not going to use that. So if you don't fly, if you don't like HD0 or you're not going to be going, like you don't like the image and you're not going to be going to races, this is probably not going to be your priority choice. You might consider something like something like this. So where this goggle, this is the goggles actually, and there's goggles all over this house. This goggle right here, it has a HDMI input, so you can feed some things into this goggle. So this is, and you will also be able to natively fly the Warp Snail system, Warp Snail avatar system. I don't know, let me know, what goggles would you buy tomorrow? It's all, any goggle manufacturer needs to think, do I have a HDMI input? That would be the #1 place. And then we're going to talk about some mounting options in just a little bit.
Betaflight 4.5 has just hit release candidate. That means that pretty soon I'm going to be telling you Betaflight 4.5 is released and you can start thinking about whether to upgrade. But before you decide whether to upgrade, you've got to know what Betaflight 4.5 brings to the table. Like, is it some new killer feature that's going to make you actually want to go through the hassle of upgrading? Or maybe there's really nothing here for you and you should just keep flying whatever the hell you're already flying. You don't have to upgrade to the latest. It's not mandatory. I'm Joshua Bardwell. You're going to learn something today. Before we get into the video, as I always do when I do an overview of a new version of Betaflight, I'd like to remind those of you who say, Betaflight's so complicated, they're always changing things, it's so hard to keep up with. I'd like to remind anybody who feels that way, nobody's forcing you to upgrade this. If you feel annoyed at all this new stuff that you have to learn, just close this video, forget Betaflight 4.5 exists, go out and enjoy your quad. This hobby is about enjoying flying your drones, not about flashing firmware, despite how it seems sometimes. There may be some killer features in here that you really want, in which case you're going to feel conflicted, but like nobody's forcing you to upgrade this. The other thing I want to say is, if you have a bind and fly quad that you bought, like a 5-inch or 7-inch, it came from the manufacturer, and it's all pre-configured, and it flies, and you're enjoying it, don't flash Betaflight 4.5 to it just because it's like the newest and latest and greatest. It will wipe out the config that the manufacturer put on the drone, and then the drone won't work anymore. And then you'll contact the manufacturer, and it seems so normal. I just updated the firmware. Of course you update the firmware, except in Betaflight, when you update the firmware, you wipe the configuration out completely, and the manufacturer will be like, oh my god, not again. And they'll have to help you get it working again by rolling the firmware back and putting the old configuration on it. So, with those disclaimers out of the way, let's proceed. And of course, in order to find this information, we're going to go to the Betaflight.com website. and the Betaflight 4.5 release notes. These are the key things that the Betaflight devs think you need to know about Betaflight 4.5 before you start using it. I'll have a link to this down in the video description, and I do recommend you go check it out if you want to dive deeper into this. Most of the things we're going to talk about in this video have an even deeper dive linked in the release notes. In fact, because this is an open source project, you can see a lot of the back and forth on GitHub as these features are developed. But thankfully, the Betaflight devs have also written up a lot of really good documentation for those of us who don't want to dive that deep. I mean, those of you who don't want to dive deeper, not me. I'm all about the deep dives. Love diving deep. So the first thing that a lot of people are going to be happy to know about Betaflight 4.5 is that previous filters, PID settings, and other tuning values should not need to change. So if you have a PID tune that you like using, or if you are using one of the predefined PID tunes from the Betaflight presets tabs, developed by people like Sugar K or Mark Spatz, UAV Tech, if you've got one of those PID tunes that works for you on Betaflight 4.4, then you're not going to have to start from scratch on 4.5. And frankly, this is a huge courtesy from the Betaflight devs to all of their users. I get it that there have been times in the past when the devs worked really hard to make the PID loop work better, and drones went from flying kind of crappy to flying pretty good most of the time. But it's nice to have a Betaflight release that doesn't just completely shake up the PID loop from bottom to top, forcing everybody to redo their PID tunes. Next, you must know that in order to use Betaflight 4.5, you also need to be using Configurator 10.10. So before you get into all this stuff, you're going to want to go to here and download. Well, currently it is at 10.10.0 RC1. That is the release candidate version. It also hasn't released yet, and there are actually a few small bugs in it. So you're going to want to make sure if you download RC1 that you stay on top of it and download later release candidates as they come out up to the final release. Or if you're not like in an absolute hurry to do this, just wait for it to release in the next few weeks and skip that whole nonsense. Just download the final release. But I'll go ahead and download RC1 right now and install it so we can actually like look at it. And now you can see that when I run Betaflight Configurator here in the upper left hand corner, it says version 10.10.0 RC1. And that is what we need to see, 10.10.0, if we're going to be working with Betaflight 4.5. With that out of the way, let's take a look at the changes and fixes and improvements in Betaflight 4.5. And I'm not just going to go down and read you everything in this list. You can also read. I'm going to sort of selectively go through this list and try to highlight and demonstrate things that I think are most interesting. There will be a table of contents down in the video description, and there should be chapter markers in the timeline. This is going to probably be a little bit long, and so you may want to skip ahead to features you care the most about. And we'll start with the changes here in the cloud build system introduced in 4.4. In case you don't know, well, the way that works is we plug in a flight controller that we're going to flash, and we go to update firmware, and here in the firmware flasher tab, we have the ability to choose which options we want to include in the flight control firmware. So in the past, Betaflight firmware included every single thing that Betaflight could do and every single sort of piece of hardware that it might possibly support. Then that made the code get really big. And eventually the code was going to get so big that it wouldn't fit on the flight controller. It makes sense. It's really thin. Would you cram all that code in there? Dumb jokes aside, the way that devs address that is by building the firmware dynamically at the time that you flash, and then you can leave certain things out of the build to save space. The default settings for cloud build have now changed. The default radio protocol is now Crossfire, because a lot of people are using ExpressLRS and Crossfire. If you use SBus or any of the other protocols like that, you'll need to change this and choose, for example, SBus. The telemetry protocol being set to none, don't freak out about that. Crossfire always includes telemetry, even if you don't select a protocol here. This telemetry protocol is used if you're using some other kind of telemetry. Also notice that there are options down here in other options that you may want to leave out. There's really no reason to leave them out as long as the firmware is small enough that it fits on your flight controller. But for example, if you wanted to add some other option and needed to save space, many people aren't going to be using Acro Trainer. If you've got a high definition video transmitter, digital video transmitter, you could delete the standard definition OSD, and so on. Under other options, we can go down here, and there are several options that have been added that we're going to look at a little bit later and talk about what they are and when you might want to add them. If you want a deeper dive on the Cloud Build system, I actually did a video about it back when Betaflight 4.4 released, and I suggest you take a look at that. This isn't really a place to go into the deeper ins and outs of this, and there will be a link in the video description below if you want to check that out. One of the most significant changes in Betaflight 4.5 has been improvements and, frankly, fixes to bugs in the GPS system. There's a whole bunch of information here about like optimizations that the Betaflight devs made, and I don't really care about that. Thank you for making GPS work better. I'm sure that's wonderful. As a user, I don't really care. I'm just glad that it works. And Betaflight 4.4 had a bug that it did not work correctly with M10 GPSs. The short version is that M10 GPSs lock a lot more satellites a lot faster and just work a lot better than the older M8 satellites that many people were using. But Betaflight 4.4 didn't know how to talk to them correctly, and as a result, they just didn't work very well. Betaflight 4.5 now correctly talks to M10 GPSs, at least supposedly, and that means that people wanting to get the best possible GPS performance finally can. But Betaflight 4.5's GPS improvements do not just include better support for the hardware, they also include better behavior when Betaflight activates Return to Home. Betaflight calls their Return to Home GPS Rescue, and I've joked, actually pretty seriously joked, that the reason they call it GPS Rescue instead of Return to Home is that the only time you'd use it is if it's rescuing you from losing your craft entirely. It's not like with a DJI drone where you just hit Return to Home because you don't feel like flying home and the drone nicely comes back. There's always been a chance that Betaflight GPS Rescue would kind of freak out because it's always been kind of half-baked. I mean, no offense to the devs, they're doing their best, but you take somebody like Pavel Spikowski who works on iNav and he just spends all day thinking about GPS Return to Home and how to make it good. And the Betaflight devs think about how to make your drone fly better. It's just not where they put their focus. But Betaflight's GPS Rescue has improved significantly, and many of the situations that caused it to either fall out of the air for no freaking reason or take off flying the wrong direction, those things have been fixed. For example, in Betaflight 4.4, if there was significant drift due to wind when initiating GPS Rescue, the quad could take off flying the wrong direction and then make a long arc back to the right direction before it finally started flying home. And if the quad crashed into something in the meantime, it would sure look like the quad just flew into an object for no freaking reason. Another issue that GPS Rescue had was that if you were too close to the home point, then when you activated GPS Rescue, it would not activate, and potentially the quad would just fall out of the air for no reason. Now, GPS Rescue can be initiated close to the home point, even directly overhead, as long as the machine is more than a certain altitude. So the devs want to make sure that you don't activate GPS Rescue too close to yourself, because if the quad flies the wrong direction or makes like a long turn before it figures out where it needs to go, it could fly into you, and they don't want to let that happen. But as long as it's a certain height in the air, Betaflight 4.5 will allow you to activate it, no matter how close to home it is, and that's a nice feature of the game. One last thing about GPS Rescue, if you are using it, go to this page, and I'll link it in the video description below. There are an in-depth guide for setting up and tuning GPS Rescue to work optimally, and there are a couple things in there that if you don't do them, then there's a high probability that GPS Rescue just won't work, and you'll be like, hey, I thought Bardwell said this was fixed, and then my quad fell out of the air for no reason. You need to go read this page in a little bit more depth. We're not going to go into it in this video, though. If you fly with a GPS on board and don't use GPS Rescue, you may have found yourself thinking, what the hell am I doing? Why do I even have this? And Betaflight 4.5 has added a new feature to Blackbox Explorer. By the way, if you use Blackbox recordings and you view those Blackbox recordings with Blackbox Explorer, there's a new version of Blackbox Explorer you need to download too. Well, you don't have to, but you should. And that new version of Blackbox Explorer can actually show a map of your flight path. That's pretty cool. There's a button in Blackbox Explorer to export a GPX file. And that GPX file can then be imported to online mapping software such as GPX Studio to create something that looks kind of like this. It's pretty freaking cool. Is it in 3D? Holy shit, it's in 3D. I can do this with Betaflight? That's freaking amazing. FAA, I didn't go over 400 feet. I promise. Delete, shut down. Blackbox Explorer can also do a more rudimentary form of GPS mapping built in, where it shows a small 2D map within Blackbox.
Oh shit.
Explorer, and as you scrub through the file, it moves, it shows you where you were in space at the time. For those who race, and specifically those who race with LEDs, like, well, Tiny Trainer is the main race format that I know requires that you have LEDs, and they do that because they want to be able to see what channel you're on just by looking at your LEDs. And that means you have to manually configure your flight controller to change the LED color based on what channel you're on. I actually made a video about this a long time ago, and the video is now completely obsolete because now Betaflight does that automatically. In Betaflight 4.5, your LED strip color can be automatically set according to your VTX channel. Yay! And that means it should make things a lot easier for those who are doing that kind of racing. Betaflight 4.5 has made significant changes to how angle and horizon mode work. In fact, one person asked me whether I thought these changes to horizon mode were going to change my advice that you should basically never fly horizon mode and it should never exist at all. We'll talk about that in just a second. But let's talk about angle mode first. There's been a problem with angle mode that everybody sort of compensates for, but that one man, Chris Rosser, thought was worth fixing. And the problem is that in angle mode, if you're pitched forward and you're flying forward, if you put in pure yaw, the quad doesn't really lean into the turn. In fact, the quad will rotate on the yaw axis, but without putting some additional roll input in, it will kind of slide through the turns, and that wasn't what he wanted. Chris Rosser thought, I want to be able to steer my drone in angle mode purely with the yaw stick. So I pitch forward to go forward, and I steer with yaw, and the roll axis is completely unnecessary if I want it to be. And that's what this feature does. Angle mode has changed to be Earth reference. That means that when you put in yaw, the quad yaws about the horizon, not about its own axis. You can still put roll inputs in to add extra roll if that's what you want. Now, some people are going to like this feature, but people who have gotten used to flying angle mode without it are going to hate it, like whoop racers probably. If many whoop racers these days are switching to acro mode, but those who still fly in angle mode are probably going to hate it. So if you want to, you can turn it off with this CLI input, or you can lower its strength by setting that value to 50, or you could change it anywhere from 0 to 100. But if you're just getting started with angle mode, you may find this to be a much more intuitive way. The quad is just going to seem like it turns a lot sharper when in angle mode without you having to mix in roll by yourself. Speaking of turning sharper, angle mode has also been improved due to a PID control parameter called angle feed forward. Basically, the angle mode PID controller used to just have a P value, and so if you wanted sharper performance, you had to up the P value, but the problem was that as the P value gets too high, then you get oscillation, and so a lot of people couldn't get angle mode feeling as sharp as they wanted it to feel. The addition of a feed forward term on the angle mode PID controller means that you can have sharper stick feel without having to go to those ultra high P values, and it should just feel a lot sharper and be better to tune for those who want to tune those things. As for horizon mode, so first of all, what is horizon mode? In case people don't know, horizon mode is like trying to split the baby. If you remember the old biblical story, where two people are fighting over a baby, and Was it King Solomon says, okay, let's just cut the baby in half and give each of you a half. And everybody goes, no, that's a terrible idea, right? And Horizon Mode has also been a terrible idea because it tries to split the baby between Angle Mode, which is easy to fly because it automatically levels itself back out when you center the stick. So if you're like pushing the stick around and you're getting out of control, you just release the stick, you center the stick, and the quad levels back out again and it just gets your control back. But you can't do flips and rolls, and people like to do flips and rolls. So Horizon Mode, the way it worked is when you were near the center stick, the quad would level back out again. But then as you deflect the stick further and further, there was a transition point where it would switch to acro mode and you could do flips and rolls. But the problem was that that transition point was difficult to predict. So you'd be in the middle of a turn and you'd be like banking into a turn in angle mode, and then suddenly the quad was in acro mode and it turned over and it rolled over and it crashed. And it made it really hard to do smooth, precise turns in Horizon Mode. I've always said that Horizon Mode encourages bad habits and just makes bad pilots. And I know there are people out there who will argue with me and say, I learned on Horizon Mode, it was fantastic. That's fine, whatever worked for you, but my opinion has been either learn in acro mode or learn in angle mode if that's what you want, but just forget Horizon Mode. But they've changed Horizon Mode. How have they changed it? What they did is now Horizon Mode is basically just acro mode. But when you center the sticks and the quad is close to being flat, then it becomes angle mode and it holds its level. So, like, I'm not sure how I feel about this. Because in old style Horizon Mode, if you flipped upside, like, what's the killer feature that you want out of angle mode? It's that when you center the sticks, the quad levels out. And in old style Horizon Mode, if you were like upside down in the middle of a roll and you centered the stick, the quad would flip back over and level out. That seems like what you want. But it sounds like new style Horizon Mode, if you're upside down and you center the stick, the quad goes, nah, I'm still in Horizon Mode. I'm just going to leave it to you to turn me back up right side up again. And that's cool, but like the whole reason you're using it is that you don't know how to do that. So the idea here is that like Horizon Mode, you can get all the acro performance you want. Yay, but I'm just flying acro mode then. But then like if you're mostly flat and level anyway, then when you center the stick, it'll level back out again. I gotta try this. To really see if there's any benefit. I could imagine there being some benefit, but like, I gotta try it. I don't know. Opinion reserved. Here's a cool feature called Easy Landing that addresses the thing that Betaflight does when you try to land and the quad bounces and pops up and won't land, or you're trying to do a perch and it won't land. Easy Landing is designed to make landings less bouncy even when air mode is on. See, the old way of solving this is to turn air mode off, but air mode makes your quad fly better for acro flight, and people like didn't like doing that. So like some people who like to do a lot of perches or slides will put air mode on a switch, and just before they do a perch or a slide, they'll flip the switch and turn air mode off. And people were like, why do I have to do that? I have to like, set up this whole thing and flip a switch? I just want to fly my drone. Easy Landing detects when the sticks are centered and the throttle is at 0. And the idea is that if your sticks are centered and your throttle is at 0, you're probably landing, maybe? Because like, think about it. If you're flying and you do a big punch out and you lower your throttle to 0 and you flip over, you probably, sticks aren't at 0. Like you've got the roll stick deflected or you're pitching back, you're probably flying the drone. But if your sticks are at 0 and your throttle is down, you're probably landing. And when that condition exists, Easy Landing basically decreases the aspects of the PID controller that cause it to bounce, and hopefully make it easier to perch and easier to land. Now, if you want to try this out, you need to know that this is turned off by default. This is a big enough change that they didn't want to make it the default. You need to turn it on manually, and you're going to do that with this CLI parameter. And in order to go back, if you don't like it, you do it like this. And you should also know that there are a couple of tuning parameters you can try to change when landing is detected and when this happens. I'd be curious to hear, if you try this out, what you think of it. In fact, we'll probably make a video sometime in the future trying it out and seeing how it works. If you've got a quad that kind of freaks out after you arm it while it's sitting on the ground, it's like shaking and it's like, oh, and then as soon as you take off and fly it, it's fine. There's a new feature in Betaflight 4.5 to help address that called low throttle TPA. And what this basically does is reduce the PIDs while the quad is on the ground before you arm. It's configured by using the TPA breakpoint lower parameter, and that is the throttle position below which the PIDs will be reduced. And then as soon as you raise the throttle and take off and exceed this threshold, the PIDs go back to full and stay that way until you disarm. For more information on exactly how to configure that, you can see this pull request here in the Betaflight configurator. This parameter is enabled by default, so if you notice that your jittery quad on arming has gone away in 4.5, that may be why. If you have a Crossfire receiver that is buried inside an aircraft and you hate having to open the aircraft up to get the receiver to go into bind mode, now you can activate binding in Crossfire receivers with the BindRx CLI command. I wonder if you can also hit the bind button in the Betaflight. Like, typically there's just a bind button in the Betaflight receiver tab where you can hit it instead of having to go to the CLI. But I don't see that here. So I guess you have to actually go. And this is a big deal for anyone who wants to save money, which is pretty much everyone. AT32 is a new processor that replaces the STM32 processor that's on most of our flight controllers. And the big thing about it is it's much, much less expensive. Here, for example, is the iFlight Blitz ATF435 flight controller and ESC. It is an iFlight Blitz flight controller and ESC, just like the F4 version you might be used to, but it's only $40 freaking dollars. It was $60 originally. They've marked it down. It was a lot less money for the flight controller and ESC. There are other ones out there, like there's this one from Neutron RC, which is only $26 for a flight controller. I hesitate on this one because I have no freaking idea who Neutron RC is, and I'm always a little hesitant to buy a bargain basement piece of electronics from a manufacturer I'm not super familiar with. But basically, we should hopefully see a flourishing of AT32 flight controllers and ESCs at much lower price points. And when you see those and you wonder, why are these so cheap? Should I be suspicious? The answer is that the AT32 can do like 99% of what you're wanting it to do. There are a few little hardware related bugs that the devs are still working out, but for the most part, it's just a less expensive version of what you're buying anyway, and it's probably worth a consideration. Now at this point, you're probably wanting a little bit more of a deep dive into some of those features, and that doesn't exist at the day that I'm making this, but it will exist at some point in the future. I'm going to create a Betaflight 4.5 playlist. It's going to be linked in the video description below, and I'll put a card on screen to it. And today, if you're watching this at the day of the release, this is the only video that's in it. But hopefully at some point in the future, I'll be testing out some of these features and showing you in the real world how they work. And these videos will be added to that playlist. So I hope you click through and see what's there. I'll see you there. Betaflight 4.5 is just around the corner. It's currently in release candidate. And a little while ago, I put out a video going through the new exciting features that Betaflight 4.5 is going to bring to us. And now it's time for me to start testing those features. But before I can do that, I've got to upgrade one of my quads to Betaflight 4.5. And I've decided that the one I'm going to do it on is this one. The iFlight Chimera 7 Pro V3. I don't know. The iFlight Chimera 7 that I reviewed a while back. And the reason is that, well, it's just a good quadcopter. But the real reason is that it's got a GPS on it. And one of the features that Betaflight 4.5 has added is much better support for GPSs and GPS rescue. So come along with me as I upgrade this thing from Betaflight 4.3 or 4.3, I think, to Betaflight 4.5 release candidate. How hard could it be? Just flash it and copy the config over, right? No. I'm Joshua Bardwell. You're going to learn something today. I think I'm lower in the frame than I usually am. Feels like there we go. Okay. If you're going to flash Betaflight 4.5, the first thing you need to know is that you must download and install Configurator 10.10. The configurator has a separate version number from the actual firmware that goes on the flight controller, and the new flight controller firmware has to be supported by the new configurator. Configurator. So I'm currently on Betaflight configurator 10.10.0, release candidate 2, and I guess as long as I'm doing it, I should look and see if there's a new one. And at this time, no, there isn't. Release candidate 2 is still the latest one. At the time that you are watching this, it may be fully released, and you may just have 10.10.0 release and not need to do anything special, but you definitely still need to make sure you are on 10.10.0 or newer before you proceed. The next thing we're going to do is back up our configuration. Always back up your configuration, but especially when you're flashing a new firmware version, because here's the thing, this may all go completely off the rails. It might not work for some reason, and you need the ability to hit the rewind button and go back to your nice working quadcopter if that happens, and there is no rewind button. There's no undo. You have to manually back up the configuration so you can restore it later. Here's how we're going to do that. We're going to connect to the flight controller and go to the presets tab, and then we're just going to hit save backup. And here's our backup, and I'll just, yeah, that's fine. Betaflight CLI backup, yada, yada, yada. And then what I like to do is just open up that file and double check what all is in it. I've had rare cases where, like, it didn't load the config and the file was empty. So I'll just double check that, yeah, it looks like there's a CLI dump in there. We are now good to proceed. Next, I'm going to hit update firmware, and I'm going to enable show release candidates. If you're doing this at some point in the future, when Betaflight 4.5 is released, you don't need to show release candidates, you'll just flash it from the list. We're going to change here to release and release candidates, and we'll hit auto detect to try to detect the target. It has detected the iFlight Blitz F722 target on my flight controller, which is the correct one, and then Betaflight 4.5.0. We do need to just glance at these options down here. These options are part of the new Betaflight, actually it's new as of 4.4, the Betaflight cloud build functionality, and basically what it means is that some parts of Betaflight aren't going to be included. For example, if you were using SBus as your receiver protocol, that just wouldn't be in Betaflight. It wouldn't work at all unless you change this option. For more about the cloud build functionality, I made a separate video about that back when Betaflight 4.4 came out, and I'll put a link in the video description below. We're using ExpressLRS, and so the Crossfire radio protocol is correct. Motor protocol will be DShot, that is correct, and we're going to leave all these other options as they were. Actually, get rid of Acro Trainer. I don't care about Acro Trainer. I think we're good. So then we will load firmware online. Why did he get rid of Acro Trainer mode? What's wrong with Acro Trainer mode? Nothing's wrong with it. Just don't use it. You want to know what Acro Trainer mode? You don't know what Acro Trainer mode is, do you? Link in the video description below to my video about Acro Trainer mode. It's for line of sight flying. Who does that? Why do I have an attitude? Like flash firmware. It's reminding me to create a backup. That's cute. I already created a backup, so I will ignore the risk. That's nice that they've added that. Why do I have an attitude about that? Like, amazing pilots fly line of sight. Like, Quad Mover, for example, comes to mind. And Jen Kim flies line of sight. They do crazy things. Why have an attitude? I'm in a mood today. Now, after it says programming successful, the next thing you might be tempted to do is connect. Oh, we're going to get this warning. Betaflight 4.5.0. Why didn't it ask me to apply custom defaults? Does it do that automatically now? Oh, the apply custom defaults is gone. Cute. Okay, fine. The next thing you might be tempted to do is go to the presets tab and load that backup back in. Do not do that. You cannot load a backup directly between Betaflight 4.4 and Betaflight 4.5, or between any major Betaflight version, 4.3, 4.4, 4.5. You can't just load the config in. It doesn't work like that. But I'm going to try and make our life easier by showing you specific parts of the configuration that I'm pretty sure we can safely pull in. But the first thing I need to do is put my quadcopter flat on the desk and go to the settings and calibrate the accelerometer. We got a warning about that when I first powered up. The accelerometer calibration is easy to do, and you should just do it each time you flash the flight controller. Next, I'm going to go into my configuration here, and let's see if we can just put Betaflight on the other side and go to the CLI tab. And I'm just gonna start going down through this configuration, looking for parts of it that I know, and now you will know, are safe to pull in. And the first
I think this is a pretty interesting thing to talk about on my channel since I've been focusing so much on this class category. And before getting started, I want to point out that the frame design here is straight up ripped off of the Heli Nation Twig. They even called it the Twig. I'm pretty sure Heli Nation was the first person to do it. I did a little bit of research, maybe not enough, but yeah, I just wanted to point that out. It is an Eachine product. Eachine has been known to do this kind of thing in the past. The other thing I want to point out is just the tip. So when I put my SD cards in these little split kind of camera things, I actually put a piece of tape on the SD card itself, slip it into the slot, and then tape the tape to the quad itself. That's because a lot of times you'll crash really hard and the card will just fly out of the board and you'll just lose your SD card. This way, at least you don't lose your SD card. Also, when you put the tape on, don't put the tape on the side of the pins, even if you put it above pins, because when you put it in the PC board itself, the tape will hold the card off of the pins a little bit, and sometimes you get a little bit of error. So whatever you do, take the non-pin side and stick it to your quad. All right, so let's go over this quad. This is really interesting because this quad weighs the same as this quad here, which is my TP3, the Toothpick 3, the design that I've been working so hard on. The motors are lighter, and it has a baby Caddx something or other in there. And another thing I want to point out up front is that this is yet another Caddx product, and I am not making this up. Literally almost every single Caddx product I receive has a fatal flaw that makes it unusable, and in this case, the lens is not focused at all, and in the FPV feed, it looks like you're flying through a dream state. Everything is just soft and fluffy, and it's not because the lens is out of focus, it's because the lens apparatus or the board, the PC board, was mounted to the lens apparatus tilted. So it's like you have this little tilt shift effect in the camera, and it's just awful. And I'll talk about the baby turtle a little bit later as well, because I actually find the video quality out of it is surprisingly good. But let's talk about the quad now. So the quad comes with these 30-28, the Gemfan 30-25 props, and right off the bat, just throw these props away. They were kind of okay in the past, but there are better props now. The HQ 3x2 is much better than this prop, and the Gemfan 3018 prop is also much better than this prop. This prop has a annoying issue where it actually has a lot of pitch on it. I don't know if it's actually 25, but it actually has a lot more. It feels like it has a lot more pitch than it actually does. It's really poppy in the throttle, and it has really lacking grip somehow. It just is not a very well-performing prop by today's standards compared to the HQ 3x2 and the Gemfan 3018. So pick up any one of those. My preference is the 3018. I did help develop that prop, strongly helped develop that prop. I think it performs really nicely. The difference between the 3018 and the 3x2 is that the 3x2 basically has a little bit more speed, but it has a little bit less control. The 3018 is a lighter overall blade. The whole blade itself is lighter than the 3x2, so you generally have a little bit more control, and it's a much more zippy prop, and the low end of the throttle is a little bit more manageable. So that's kind of the characteristics that I prefer in micro prop, so that's why it is made that way. So next, let's talk about the motors. These are 1105 5200 kV motors. I think that 5200 kV is actually pretty accurate as well. With this 3-inch prop, that seems like it should be a 3S kV for the setup, and in fact, it probably is best on 3S, but the problem with 1105s, 1106s, 110 whatever height motors for 3-inch is that they lack control. And this is an area where I know I'm going to get some flack from people, because people have 1105s and 1106s and they love them, they think they fly fantastic, but I am just speaking from experience, having tested so many motors and having now developed so many motors, so many prototype motors with so many companies in this size class, that I can confidently say that the 11 size stator is just a little bit small for a 3-inch prop. When you give the 11 size stator more height, generally more height makes the motor want to zip through the low half of the RPM range, and so the low end of the RPM is a little bit touchy to control. Now, this does not extrapolate up to 5-inch, 4-inch, anything else. Really just focusing on microclass 2.5 and 3-inch. That's generally what I have felt across several motors that I've tested. So there's not anything different here. The 1105 motor, it does run a 3-inch prop, and it is surprisingly efficient at running this 3-inch prop. However, the control is hugely lacking, and if you can tell from my flying, I'm flying by the seat of my pants. I'm not able to keep the quad in really good control. I can't do intricate moves with it. That's also made much worse by the fact that the FPV camera is just awful, but I'll talk about that a little bit later. But in general, I don't recommend 1105, 1106 for 3-inch. I know that the Diatone Cube comes with 1105, 1106 or something like that. It comes with 1105. And that, again, has the same issue. It does have really surprisingly good efficiency and surprisingly good speed for that flight time, but it just lacks in control. Now, the Mamba motors are generally a little bit more powerful somehow than most other micro motors, and they do perform better, but still, it's not enough to make up the difference. Going with a wider motor, a 12 size motor, and a shorter height does feel better, and specifically a 13 size motor, in my opinion, is the best control I felt on a lightweight quad. And lightweight, I mean that the motor weight is really limited to around 6.5, maximum 7 grams for these really lightweight things, around 100 grams, or else it just starts getting a little bit heavy and a little bit spongy and squishy and more challenging to fly the quad nicely the way you want. This is getting really, really specific, but that's just my kind of high-level thought process for when I'm assessing these motors and when I assess so many of these motors for the toothpick class and for all this stuff. I highly recommend not going with an 11 size motor for 3-inch. Now, that also is not true for 1S and other factors, but in general, for the 2S, 3S category, micro 3-inch twin blade, highly recommend 12 size or 13 size motors and not such a tall motor like a 1206 or 1207. The 1206 just happens to be really inefficient as well. I can go on talking about this for an hour, so let's continue with the rest of the quad. Eachine is not a brand that makes anything. They are a brand that rebadges everything. So the boards in here are Happy Model boards. They are not Eachine boards, and as so, you have the very, very high likelihood of the flight controller burning out, because just keep that in mind that this Happy Model Crazy board, the quality control has taken a sharp decline, and I have had very poor experiences on my side of things. Maybe you have a different experience. That's just my experience that I'm presenting. The VTX on this thing is actually totally fine. It is a Happy Model VTX and it works great. What's odd is that the DVR VTX, the Diamond VTX DVR, has a little bit of reliability issues, and I have had 2 of them fail on me just totally randomly out of the blue, even though I would assume that they're using the same DVR components on that board. Who really knows? Whatever it is, this DVR seems to work fine, and I've had about 7 or 8 of them, and none of them have failed on me thus far. Now let's get to the Baby Turtle, which I think is a much more interesting discussion than all of this together. And that's because the Baby Turtle's video, the quality of the video coming out, in my opinion only, please take this with a grain of salt, but I'm pretty sure that if people looked at these, if you personally watched the video footage side by side, raw, not like the YouTube compression stuff, side by side, you would prefer the video quality coming out of this Baby Turtle compared to the Tarsier or the Nano Hybrid, whatever, from Runcam, which I haven't even tried yet, but I have one and I've been meaning to, I just haven't gotten around to it. Because it is really crisp, really sharp, really nice. Kudos to Caddx for being able to pull that off. I wish that they would fix their quality control so that their products were actually usable. But this Baby Turtle, for a standalone HD camera only, I would say gets a thumbs up from me. I don't know what the price is. I haven't looked at it yet, but it's good enough for me to want to put that weight on my quad. Where it does fall flat on its face, aside from its quality control, is the FPV feed. It's a split product. The FPV feed is not good. The the user experience is also not the best. However, it is more reliable. It does turn on and just keep recording. It's also just 1080p 30, I believe. It might do 1080p 60. I'm not sure. I wasn't able to get the Wi-Fi working. That's that user experience issue. Wi-Fi working to be able to actually adjust the settings or whatever. But it doesn't even matter. You can see the quality of the camera regardless of the resolution. The resolution is not the most.
赛季里面那个模型女吗？
不是，它蓝色的吧？
它也可以变绿色的啊。
确实啊，对，没错。
变色龙？
不是。
绿色的绿鬣蜥，
不是。哦，
绿鬣蜥不是，
不是。
来，我跟
科罗
你讲，
拉多蜥，
你要猜多久？
你要把整个爬虫类的族谱都猜一次，是不是？
哎，它平常小小的，但如果你放纵它的话，它就变大。
快
有哈，会变大哦。然后它会生气勃勃，
生气勃勃
而且朝你进攻。
啊！就在你，
哎，什么？
对啊，蟑螂不是绿色的啊，
对啊，蟑螂不是绿色的啊。
会朝我进攻，我通常都是蟑螂啊。就是越大，要它不要过来，它一直冲过来。
然后它会变大哦。
蟑螂会变大吗？对啊。
好，他的武器是什么？跟你讲，他的武器是什么？他的武器是石头。
石头。
对，一些冷兵器或弹弓。
抓。太多了，太多项了吗？你用的太大了一点吧？
好，没有，但是武器有一些比较原始，他会用树枝
抓。是家伙，
我继续哦。
而且
很快。
说实话，你只要把它弄大之后，它可以在很快的时间内跑遍你的那个敏感带。
抓。
可以吧？
一个会伸舌头的东西要跑遍我的敏感带。
哇，然后你的敏感带就
对啊，这是真的吗？我怀疑啦。
啊，可以看。
你们没有看过那个影片
可以看，你跑过去的时候，
嗯，
你会痒痒的，因为它很多毛。
它很多毛抓。
知道啊，真是。
没有，因为你每次说谎的时候都会，它很多毛。异常的希望，我相信。
它咬起来很多汁。
我超喜欢台中的观众，因为你们都会
啊，
因为上一场也是这个样子，上一场做的是啊，
好，而且它口水很多，
口水很多，抓，
说真的吧？它不是很多啊。
我不知道。
我猜了，应该是这样的。
甲虫，
不是，
而且它会飞，
会飞，
对，它其实会飞。
滑行啊，算滑行啊。
对。
就是它会滑行。
抓。
啊，它不会滑行。
你在浪费时间了。
滑行，它不会滑行。
大家已经变成了要来挖脚。
它有点干。它有点干。对，
好干。
然后会遇到辐射的时候，它会变成恐龙。
会辐射，哥吉拉，摩斯拉，特斯拉，哪个啦？
特斯拉的确有绿色，没有错。
摩斯拉不是。
特斯拉可以拨片的敏感带吗？
我可以用我的敏感带拨片它。我手借来车吗？我好爽啊！这我可以，这我可以。那时候你就把手开好吗？
哎，他脚走路的时候会这样子。
哦，
知道了。
哎，
蜥蜴啊，那么啪嚓，
这个太明显了。
闪击。
小日本。
我就是不能说实话的人啊。
真的。
我就要持续说谎啊。
而且你演的太好了。
你说这个吗？
对。
还能怎么样？太明显了。
哪一个商场会这样跑？
我刚刚以为我在看侏罗纪公园。我说哇，我小时候看过这个。
哦，我真的回报他那个绿色的卢妈妈，真是，觉得太精彩。哎，好哇，
今天谁猜到？
一开始就猜得很。
The Crux 3 canopy, I use that a lot. Matter of fact, I bought a lot of those Some people have used these and broken them. I think it depends upon the weight of your quad, the weight of the battery that you're flying, and how you're crashing. And then, of course, we have Jim Fan 40mm tri-bladed props. And that's really the build. Now, if you're familiar with how I tend to fly these things, I use these little tiny Nanotech 300 milliamp 2S batteries. Really good battery. They have several others that look like this, and some that are bigger that look similarly, but these are the best batteries that that Hobby King sells. And the ones I like to use. The other ones do not fly or perform nearly as well. They come with a red JST, so you have to swap that out. That's the downside of this. Of course, if you have Beta FPV 450s or G&B 450s, they all fit in this tray just fine. But because of the way I like to fly and getting, approximately a 245 flight is good for me, I go with these batteries because that's just how I enjoy things. The way I have it built, it comes in at just about 36.5 grams. For a little bit of perspective, this analog version comes in at just about 23.5 grams, so substantially lighter. This is the Happy Model 1S version of the Mobula 7, a walk snail version, and it comes in at 35 at just about 0.5 grams. So 1S and just a touch lighter than my 2S one. Then we got the Meteor 75 from Beta FPV, comes in at almost 39.5 grams. Of course, that's the heaviest of the bunch. So I mentioned the motors that I wanted to use on this, and you might say, well, those are bigger, heavier motors. What about the 1002s? And if you've already left that comment, I kind of left a gap in there for you to do that. I have found the 1002 motors, while they're good motors, they have a very specific place within my quad building, my quad fleet, and that is to be an ultralight 2-inch quad that is running 2-inch bi-blades. I don't find there to be an efficiency advantage or a power advantage in whoops and 40mm props.
In this video, we're checking out the new CrazyBee F4 Pro version 3.0 boards, and they're made by Happy Model, and there's also an eSheen version as well. We've got the Happy Model version here on the left. This is the plug-and-play version, and then we have got the plug-and-play and the FrSky version here on the left. I'm sorry, on the right, and these are the ones from eSheen. So, of course, the Happy Model version is going to be in the Larva X here. This is the one that I reviewed a couple weeks ago. And then the eSheen version here is going to be in the Cinecan. And I'm pretty sure that these crazy boards are going to be the same, but I've actually opened these up. I just got these in. Obviously, the eSheen ones are going to be at Banggood. And then this, if you want the Happy Model version, you can order directly from Happy Model, or I think this one was sent to by Geek Buying, I believe. I'll put a link to this one down in the description. And you'll also notice that there's a price difference between these. For whatever reason, the eSheen versions cost about $7 more than the CrazyBee from Happy Model and Geek Buying. So I have no idea why that is. Someone can answer that down in the comments below. Let's go ahead and open these up and we'll take a look at these boards and see if there's any differences. So this is the Happy Model version. We got the XT30. We got the board here, and you get your grommets and screws. So the biggest thing about the version 3 of these boards is basically they've upgraded the FETs, the ESCs from 5 amps to 10 amps now, and it'll do, so it's basically 10 amps continuous and up to 12 amp burst for I think up to 8 seconds, I believe. Someone can correct me if I'm mistaken on that one. I just trying to remember exactly all the specs and don't have that memorized, but that's basically it'll burst up to 12 amps for a certain amount of time. But you can see here, this is the layout of the board, the CrazyBee here, or the one from Happy Model, and this one says CrazyBee F4 Pro version 3, and the FETs are definitely a lot bigger on this one. Okay, so this one here is the one from eSheen, and this is the one with the built-in FrSky SDI receiver. It's got the same rubber grommets and mounting screws and XT30. As you can notice here, there's no capacitor now. I'm told that the capacitor is not needed anymore with the new redesign. This one does have the antenna here for the built-in FreeSky SPI receiver. And yes, I am going to explain how to add an external receiver to any of these at the end of the video, so stay tuned for that. But still have the plugs pre-soldered on, USB ports pointing downwards, just like before. That has not changed, but this does look pretty similar to the Crazy or the Happy Model version. So I think that there is where the receiver is. That looks a little different on top, but the rest of it looks pretty close. Let's get the corresponding plug-and-play version out. That'll be a more fair comparison. So again, the same grommets, XT30, and here's the board. So this one here is the eSheen version, and it looks the same. And we're bringing the Happy Model version here. So the Happy Model version is on the left, eSheen version on the right. And I don't notice any differences. Obviously, I think right there is where the SPI receiver is. This one here is, you'll have to add your own receiver. And this is the top of the two boards, eSheen on the right, and the Happy Model version on the left. And they look identical to me. And when there's any differences, please let me know in the comments down below. But they look the same to me. Okay, so I'm going to put the Happy Model version away for now. Let's compare the receiver version on the left versus the non-receiver version on the right. So basically you have an antenna here that doesn't exist over here. There's a little solder pad there for the antenna. And on the bottom, there's going to be that chip for the receiver right there that doesn't exist on the non-receiver version. So one thing that I learned recently is that even if you happen to get the one with the built-in, either the Spectrum FlySky or in this case the FreeSky built-in receiver, you can just turn that off and not use the SPI receiver and then still solder up your own receiver to this board. So you don't necessarily have to just get a whole new board. If you wanted to go to use your own receiver, you can just solder directly to the pads on here, because all the pads that are on the non-receiver version are on the receiver version. Okay, so I'll put a diagram up here in the upper left-hand corner of the video on the wiring of the receivers if you want to wire up certain receivers to this one. Obviously here, this is the one with the FreeSky built-in receiver, but if you turn that off in the Betaflight configuration, so instead of you would normally select SPI receiver, you would just select in this case a regular serial receiver or whatever receiver you have. And in my case, if you want to say like put an XM Plus on here, you would select serial and then S-Bus. And then the pads you want are going to be over here, so it's going to be this pad over here is going to be inverted RX1, which is going to be your S-Bus for any inverted receivers like the FreeSky XM Plus. If you want to use uninverted RX1, it's going to be over here. So you have uninverted RX1 here and RX2 over here, and then your TX1 is going to be over here. I'm sorry, this is actually TX2. And then down over here is going to be your TX1. So basically, in a nutshell, if you want to wire up, say, like a iBus receiver or Spectrum receiver, or let's say like something that does not have inversion, like say Crossfire, you're going to want to use the uninverted RX1 or RX2 over here. And so, like, for example, RX1 over here for Crossfire, and then TX1 will be over here. So you want to obviously for Crossfire connect up that pad, and then obviously your 5 volts. So your 5 volts and ground are going to be over here, these two pads, I believe. And then any of your inverted receivers are going to be over here on this pad for inverted RX1. So that's how you would connect up an external receiver. If you happen to have one that has a built-in receiver, you can just not use the SPI setting and just use whatever normal receiver setting you would use for any external receiver you would connect on any other flight controller. Okay, so I forgot to give you the weights of these guys. It's going to be a slight difference in weight. And this one with the receiver built in is like 4.95 grams. And the one with no receiver is about the same. So not much difference there. There's just a difference in the antenna. And the last thing I do want to mention is that for those of you guys that have the older versions of the Crazy Bee, or the version, in this case this is the version 2.0 or the 2.1, you can turn off the built-in receiver and attach an external receiver. And yeah, this is actually a version 2 here. Let me just show you that as well. So this one, this is a version 2.0 Crazy Bee. You have the uninverted R1 here and an inverted R1 over there. So that's how you so obviously the inverted one's going to be for your FreeSky XM Plus, XM, RXSR, and then your uninverted receiver is going to go here, DSM, FlySky, Crossfire. Now let's see if I'll see here whether other UARTs here, so you can connect up your Crossfire to this board as well and just turn off the built-in FreeSky receiver. I know a lot of people are like, oh, I gotta like throw away this board and then get going with that. The plug-and-play version, you don't have to do that. The 3.0, 2.0, or the 2.1, but not the case for the version, the very first version of the Crazy Bee F4 Pro. Okay, so that's going to do it for this video. If you are having trouble understanding what I've talked about in terms of the different receivers and hooking it up, even with the diagrams, let me know in the comments below, and I can actually show you how to wire it up in another video. But it should be fairly straightforward in terms of wiring up. Just follow the diagrams. Yeah, just make sure that you obviously can wire up things to the correct pads, and everything ought to work as expected. So that's going to do it for this video. If you have any questions, let me know, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Anyway, this video is about the Diamond VTX and some tips on getting some better results out of this particular VTX DVR combo. And there's been issues out there, and I posted something on Facebook with some tips, and this video is going to be covering that as well as a few other things. And well, first off, this does run pretty hot on 200 milliwatts because it has a lot of small components on here. It's very tightly packed, and at 200 milliwatts with the video transmitter running, and the DVR also recording, this thing does get very, very hot. So I've been flying it on my Lava X. Actually, this is the older Lava X. I have another one. There's some vents here for air cooling that will keep it cool when you're flying around. But if you're at 200 milliwatts and on the ground and just sitting there, the VTX will get very hot very quickly. And if you're using a canopy that doesn't have good airflow, it could overheat and shut down and or damage itself. So yeah, definitely use a canopy that has good airflow. And if you are going to be sitting there for a while, then you might want to use the low power disarm feature in Betaflight. I will link the Betaflight Wiki article about that down in the description. You can turn that on and also put the command up here on the screen. Obviously, you have to put the command in, hit save, and then what will happen is when you are disarmed, it will be transmitting at 25 milliwatts, and when you're armed, it will switch the power on the video transmitter to 200 milliwatts while you're flying, and whenever you're disarmed, it'll go back to 25 milliwatts. When you actually arm, it will do a brief power switch, and depending on your receiver, it may look like the video transmitter is shutting down. Then it'll be like that for not too long. I mean, like half a second, and then the video will come back. So be aware of that. That's actually how the feature works. It's not actually a problem. The other thing that people are having problems with is the recording itself. It looks glitchy, and sometimes there's problems where the recording doesn't record or is corrupted. So there's a couple things there that could help. First, there's the micro SD card. I've been using pretty much only class 10 and above cards, and 16 gigabytes or 32 gigabyte cards. I'll link some cards down below that have been working for me. If you're using a slower card or something too small or old, it may actually not be able to record at the proper bitrate, because this DVR does record at a higher bitrate than most other DVRs out there. It's like around, I think it's around 16 megabits, and I think a lot of their DVRs, onboard DVRs, are around half that, around 8 megabits. That's one of the reasons why you need a better micro SD card. Otherwise, you're going to get some weird glitching, or files aren't going to be saved or corrupted. And as for the recording format itself, it will record, I think, out of the box in PAL format, and it will split the file every 2 minutes. So, and when it is a PAL recording, it's 25 frames per second. So if you're used to editing videos in 30 frames per second, it may look like it's glitchy or skipping frames. That is the difference in the frame rate. So you can do a firmware upgrade to change two things. You can go from PAL to NTSC, of course, and also turn off the 2-minute file length. So basically, it splits the files every 2 minutes on default, and it records in PAL. If you want to keep the 2-minute split files, you can do that and just get the firmware for the split files for NTSC. But then, some people don't like that where they have to stitch the files together in editing. I guess the advantage of that is if you crash and the battery's ejected, then at least, you'll at least save the first couple of minutes, and then, if you've crashed after that, then you've lost the last portion of it. If you turn off that feature and don't split the files, if you crash and the battery's ejected, you lose the entire session. You have to press the button here at the end of the session to stop the recording, because what happens when it's recording, the light's flashing, and then if you press the button at the end, that will stop the recording. It will auto-record when you plug in the battery. On the red light starts blinking, it's recording, and then you have to press the button to stop the recording, and it'll save the file. It's a manual about something people don't realize. They fly and they think that it just auto saves, but it doesn't, and then they're like, "Where's my file?" Because when you at the end of your flight, you do have to press the button to save the file, and then when the red light stops blinking, then it's safe to unplug the battery. So another problem that some people have pointed out is that this antenna might not be that good, and the one that's on the Larvax is different from the one that comes on the Diamond DDX. As you buy it, and basically a standalone package like this, you get this monopole antenna, and depending on how this is cut, this length might be incorrect. That sometimes happens. You may want to swap this out with a different one, with a different micro FL connector, or something with a dipole instead of a monopole. And I actually haven't had any issues. I've had 4 or 5 of these, and all of them seem to be transmitting fine on 200 milliwatts. I can go pretty far on all of these. And there is this antenna here that you might want to try. This is from URUV. This is like a little clone or something. I forget. Little micro axis, I think. Micro FL connector. It's pretty tiny, as you can see here, and it'll probably fit fine. Doesn't weigh a lot. Probably fit fine in a lot of your whip style builds. So I'll link this down below if you're looking for an alternative antenna instead of the one that comes with the Diamond BTX. I think this one should be fine. I did try it out. The video reception seems to be pretty good with that one. But that was the other thing that people were complaining about, is the actual video transmission is not so great. But in my previous video, the Mythbusters video, I did test the power. It does test at 200 milliwatts. I tested more than one of them, in case you guys are wondering, and all of them were above 200 milliwatts. So I think if you're having an antenna issue, then you might want to switch to this antenna, and that might clear up your video issues. Okay, and one more thing that might help is if you are still having video reception issues, you may want to just switch to a different channel. This has nothing to do with actually this particular VTX, but just VTXs in general. You may find that you get better reception on a different channel if something is interfering in your area, or you just get weird RF issues in your particular place that you're flying at. So always give that a try first. If you're in the high end of the band, go to the low end of the band, or vice versa. If you have a band scanner on your goggles, then see where there's possibly other things transmitting, and try to avoid that parts of the band, so you get better video transmission on your VTX. Okay, so I think that's all I got for now. If you got any questions, let me know. I'll link everything that I mentioned down in the description, so check that. And yeah, hopefully this will help you guys out. Other than the few people that I've seen commenting this is a bad product and should be avoided, I've heard pretty much positive things from most people about this, especially after the last video I made about this. So I know that there's been issues where people have crashed this and then it doesn't work, and that is going to be, well, I think that's to be expected, because this is using some super tiny components on here, and they can get knocked off in a crash. Obviously, nothing's indestructible, and I think that something like this that's highly integrated, where you have a lot of really tiny components that can get knocked off, like you can see right here. And these are all little SMD components, and they're probably some of the smallest ones out there. You know, they did that to fit all this stuff into this tiny board, into a small form factor. So, yeah, if you do crash it, then yeah, you may knock off some of these small capacitors or resistors, and then of course it'll stop functioning. I believe Happy Model will still take care of you if you send it back to them. I think it's 90 days. Yeah, I'm not 100% sure on that, but they do have a warranty on this even if you crash it. So you may want to talk to your retailer, whoever you bought it from. I think Banggood or Race Day Parts are the only places I think sell this currently. Anyway, guys, that's going to do it for this video, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Alright, in this video we're checking out the Diamond VTX from Happy Model. And this is obviously very similar to their other video transmitter, up to 200 milliwatts here. This is their standard whoop VTX here on the left. But obviously the Diamond VTX is a little bigger because this has a built-in DVR here. So this is, I think, going to be the trend going forward. I like this, that it has the video transmitter and DVR all in one, and so you can record your flights. Yeah, it's going to be still standard definition video, but it does record in 720p at a higher bitrate than like Fat Shark DVR, and you don't get that obviously transmission breakup. So this is going to be great for those lighter builds. Has all the same features as smart audio. It's pit mode to 200 milliwatt power switchable. It has the same inputs and outputs here, so the plugs here and here are identical, same plug size and plug order, as well as this one here. So this one comes in from the flight controller, and this one comes in from the camera over here. And so basically the video comes in through the video transmitter, gets recorded, and it's sent out through the video transmitter that way. And then of course you have all your other connections to the flight controller. So this was a pretty easy swap in. This actually was from the Cream Puff build, which I think was I forget which, where I got the flight controller and the video transmitter from. I might have from the trash can, I think. I don't remember offhand. But I just swapped in this one for the other board, and I actually have the other one in here already. Now, mounting this does make it a little bit more challenging because I did need a longer screw, but I actually ended up using a really long screw here. You can see I have a big gap here that I probably don't need, but I didn't have I probably need something like a 0.5 millimeter or 4 millimeter shorter screw to erase that gap there. But yeah, this is how I mounted it. You have an SD card in there, get your buttons on this side. So obviously you still have the one button for changing your power band and channel. That's the same over here. So basically I believe it's this one over here is going to be your play or record and stop button. So when you plug it in, it will auto record on power up and starts recording. To stop the recording, you press the button. You need to press the button, I believe, otherwise you lose the recording. And then to start another recording, you press the button again. And then this button over here is going to be for your video transmitter settings. If you're not using smart audio, then you'll have to use the lights. But of course, if it's buried inside, like this build here, that's going to be really hard to do. So it would be advisable to use smart audio instead of the button. I'm not going to be using that. The firmware that was on here originally would loop the files every 2 minutes. It would record 2 minutes and then split the file and then create another file. If you don't want that, there's a firmware on the Happy Model website where you can flash this so that it creates a continuous file. It doesn't split the file between every 2 minutes. However, if you happen to crash and you lose power, you will lose your entire recording if you use that option. So keep that in mind. Whereas if you have the other option where it splits every 2 minutes, then you record 2 minutes and then save the file and then record another file. So you would only lose the last file up to the 2 minute mark of the recording, however long you're flying. So that could be a good thing or a bad thing. I personally prefer the continuous file versus the split files. Of course, that's just an option. That's a personal preference for you. I'll give you the weight here, but just quickly, this is other stuff that you get in the packaging, and you get the little connection that goes to the flight controller, and then when it goes to your camera, And of course you get the antenna and a little bit of screws and some rubber grommets there for mounting. So that's everything that comes in the package. And I'll just show you what the weight difference is here. So this DVR comes in at about 3.2 grams, VTX and DVR, and VTX alone is about 2 grams. So it's about 1.2 grams to get the functionality of the DVR, which is, I think, fantastic. Anyway, so if you want to record your flights with whatever camera you have on these toothpick builds or whip builds, obviously it only adds about 1.2 extra grams. I think it's a fantastic value. It's about $20 for this. It's a combo VTX plus a DVR altogether. It's maybe about $5 or $6 more than just a VTX alone. So I think it's totally worth it if you can handle the extra 1.2 grams and obviously a little bit of height in terms of the build because of the micro SD card. So definitely check this one out. I'll be linking down in the description, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Okay, so this is a follow-up video to the video I made on the CrazyBee F4 3.0 board. This is the new one that I reviewed a couple weeks ago, and this is the one that's also in Alarv X. This is actually pulled from Alarv X. And there's some questions about how to add a external receiver to the ones that have a built-in receiver. And apparently you can do this on boards going back a few generations, but I'm just going to cover the newest board here. There, if you look at the diagrams for the older boards, the same principles will apply to that. So you can just take what I say here and use it for those other boards. But as you can see here, this one has a built-in SBA receiver. And for whatever reason, these new ones, the version 3, seems to have even worse reception than the previous generation. So I wanted to add an external receiver to this one. And this is a new receiver from NubiDrone that just came out. It's called the BC or V2. It does FreeSky and Futaba protocol. I'll have a separate video on that. I'm not going to talk about that in this video. Now, I did put up a diagram on the wiring of the board here, but I guess people couldn't follow along, so I'm just going to actually show you an installed receiver here, and then I'll explain the differences between this one here, which is actually in the uninverted mode, versus the inverted receivers like the XM Plus. I think that was the most confusion, and also for those of you guys that want to use Crossfire or something like, say, with something like a RxSR with FreeSky telemetry, I'll try and explain that as well. So first off, let me just show you how I wired up this receiver here. This is an SBus receiver, and it has the signal that's coming out of here is uninverted. So a lot of people have issues with hooking up the receivers, and then it turns out that the receiver has an inverted signal and the board can't handle an inverted signal, or they have the problem that's the opposite. So this is an uninverted signal that's coming out of this particular receiver, and so I am wiring it up to this pad right here. Let's see, the camera will focus. It's right there. This is RX2. The one that's next to it doesn't have any solder on it. That copper pad there, that's blank, that's RX1. Now, the reason I'm using RX2 or UART2 for this receiver is because Smart Audio is on UART1, and this is TX1 right here, this little green wire here that goes to the Diamond VTX. This is Smart Audio, and so you can't have Smart Audio and your receiver on the same UART, so that's why it's on UART2 and not UART1. Also, for these situations where you have an uninverted receiver, you're going to want to use this pad here. It's uninverted, so it'll work for uninverted SBus, it'll work for iBus, Spectrum, and also Crossfire. So if you want to wire up a Crossfire receiver, you're also going to use RX2 here as well. Oh, and by the way, the power I'm getting here is just over here. I have ground on the same pad as ground, fix this really large blob of solder right there, That's sharing that. That's not too bad. Now, I didn't want to, you have to get 5 volts from over here. That's going to the VTX, but that looks like it's going to be pretty tight and have that one little pad for both 2 wires. So I wired my 5 volts here to the buzzer positive. This is also 5 volts, and that'll work just fine. This is the pad next to it is the buzzer negative. So if you want to get 5 volts, get it from here, and then you just solder your ground right here like that, and that'll be totally fine. So this will work for any of your receivers for power. Ground here, 5 volts here, and that'll power Spectrum, iBus, whatever. Only problem is if you have a 3.3 volt receiver. Let me see. I'm not sure if there's a 3.3 volt pad in here or not. Yeah, just look at the documentation. I don't see a 3.3 volt pad in here. So if you have one of the Spectrum satellite receivers, I'm not exactly sure what to do about that one. If you really want that information, let me know, and I'll try and dig it up. Just leave me some comments below, but I don't see that in the documentation. Anyway, back to what I was talking before. If you want to wire a Crossfire, wire it up here for 5 volts here. You're going to use RX2 here, and then TX2 is going to be this pad right there. And that's how you're going to wire up Crossfire, and then of course your normal Crossfire setup, of course. Now, if you're in this situation here, we have the Larva X, and you want to use an inverted S-Bus receiver like the XM Plus receiver, you're not going to be able to use this pad here because that's uninverted. You have to use this pad over here, board here, there. If you look at external receiver to the ones that have a built-in receiver, and apparently you can do this on boards going back a few generations, but I'm just going to cover the newest board here, there. If you look at the diagrams, so the older boards, the same principles will apply to that, so you can just take what I say here and use it for those other boards. But you can see here, this one has a built-in SBA receiver, and for whatever reason, these new ones, the version 3 seems to have even worse reception than the previous generation. So I wanted to add an external receiver to this one, and this is a new receiver from NubiDrone that just came out. It's called the BC or V2. It does FreeSky Futaba protocol. I'll have a separate video on that. I'm not going to talk about that in this video. Now, I did put up a diagram on the wiring of the board here, but I guess people couldn't follow along, so I'm just going to actually show you an installed receiver here, and then I'll explain the differences between this one here, which is actually in the uninverted mode, versus the inverted receivers like the XM Plus. I think that was the most confusion, and also for those of you guys that want to use Crossfire or something like, say, with something like a RXSR with FreeSky telemetry, I'll try and explain that as well. So first off, let me just show you how I wired up this receiver here. This is an S-Bus receiver, and it has the signal that's coming out of here is uninverted. So a lot of people have issues with hooking up the receivers, and then it turns out that the receiver has an inverted signal and the board can't handle an inverted signal, or they have the problem that's the opposite. So this is an uninverted signal that's coming out of this particular receiver, and so I am wiring it up to this pad right here. Let's see, the camera will focus. It's right there. This is RX2. The one that's next to it doesn't have any solder on it, that copper pad there, that's blank, that's RX1. Now, the reason I'm using RX2 or UART2 for this receiver is because Smart Audio is on UART1, and this is TX1 right here, this little green wire here that goes to the Diamond VTX. This is Smart Audio, and so you can't have Smart Audio and your receiver on the same UART, so that's why it's on UART2 and not UART1. Also, for these situations where you have an uninverted receiver, you're going to want to use this pad here. It's uninverted, so it'll work for uninverted S-Bus, it'll work for iBus, Spectrum, and also Crossfire. So if you want to wire up a Crossfire receiver, you're also going to use RX2 here as well. Oh, and by the way, the power I'm getting here is just over here. I have ground on the same pad as ground fixed this really large blob of solder right there. It's sharing that. That's not too bad. Now, I didn't want to, you have to get 5 volts from over here. That's going to the VTX. but that looks like it's going to be pretty tight, and have that one little pad for both 2 wires. So I wired my 5 volts here to the buzzer positive. This is also 5 volts, and that'll work just fine. This is the pad next to it is the buzzer negative. So if you want to get 5 volts, get it from here, and then you just solder your ground right here like that, and that'll be totally fine. So this will work for any of your receivers for power. Ground here, 5 volts here, and that'll power Spectrum, iBus, whatever. The only problem is if you have a 3.3 volt receiver, like, let me see, I'm not sure if there's a 3.3 volt pattern here or not. Yeah, just look at the documentation. I don't see a 3.3 volt pattern here. So if you have one of the Spectrum style receivers, I'm not exactly sure what to do about that one. If you really want that information, let me know, and I'll try and dig it up. Just leave me some comments below, but I don't see that in the documentation. Anyway, back to what I was talking before. If you want to wire a crossfire, you're gonna wire it up here for 5 volts here. You're going to use RX2 here, and then TX2 is going to be this pad right there, and then that's how you're going to wire up crossfire, and then of course your normal crossfire setup, of course. Now, if you're in this situation here, we have the Larva X, and you want to use an inverted S-Bus receiver, like the XM Plus receiver, you're not going to be able to use this pad here because that's uninverted. You have to use this pad over here, right there. It says like, so there's like, this is 1, 2, 3, so there's 4 pads. There's 1, 2, 3, 4. It's pad number 3. That is inverted S-Bus right there. But that is on UART 1. So if you want to use an XM Plus receiver with smart audio, you have to move smart audio from UART 1 to UART 2. So this green wire here, you have to move over to TX2 over here, and then wire up your signal for your FreeSky XM Plus receiver to this pad over here, which is inverted RX1 on UART 1, and then you get power and ground over here, same as before. So yeah, I tried to explain that to a few people, but I guess they were too confused, so I just decided to make another video about that. Because inversion versus uninverted is very confusing for a lot of people, so hopefully this has helped you guys out. Also, you do have to turn off the internal SPI receivers. If you're using the ones with the internal SPI receiver, you have to, obviously change it to serial-based receiver and S-Bus. And when you do that, it'll actually turn off the internal SPI receiver. And you should probably desolder the antenna here. And I just want to get rid of it, so I'm just going to use some cutters and cut it off. You should probably desolder it, but I'm just going to cut it off. Don't need it, and that will get rid of that. It won't be in the way, and then I go ahead and use this new receiver. Hopefully this has better range. We'll see. I'll have a separate video on this one if you're interested in the B-Seaver V2 from NewbieDrone. That'll be in a separate video. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thumbs up if you liked it, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one.
Hello everyone, today we're taking a look at the Baby Tooth from FPV Cycle. Powered by FPV Cycle 1202.5 11,500 kV motors on GymFan 3018 props. Down inside there is the FPV Cycle Z's flight controller. It's an all-in-one board with a 6-amp 4-in-1 ESC and an F4 processor. I put the TBS Pro 32 Nano on the backside of my camera, which the camera is the Caddx Ant. My receiver right here is the RXSR. The way I built mine weighs just under 45 grams. With the G&B 521S battery, it weighs just under 60 grams. Carbon fiber is 2mm thick. Arm thickness is somewhere in 5.5. Motor post to motor post, I'm getting about 115 millimeters. I am using a rubber band to hold the battery with a couple of cheap battery pads. This little part right here is where you would mount your mini Immortal T. I just take my antennas down. Okay, before we get started, you're going to find people in this video. And it's actually my new neighbor and some contractors. And I was over there before I started flying, and I had my goggles on my head, and eventually the topic of having these strange goggles on my head came up. And so they asked me about them, and I was telling them, well, I was preparing to fly, but things you're out here doing what you're doing, I'm probably not going to fly. And they kind of were curious, so then I went over and I grabbed the quad, kind of just showed them everything, asked them if they'd like to watch. I would go grab a second goggles or a monitor or something like that, and they decided not to because, They had business at hand to deal with, and I said, well, if you'd rather I not, I won't. They said, no, go ahead and fly. And then the contractor said, could you fly it over near us? And I said, well, I probably shouldn't do that. It's, pretty safe and everything. But anywho, they weren't bothered by the quad. They weren't bothered by me flying. I do take a little extra precaution in making sure that I don't fly over into that space too much. Basically, the punch outs over the house about the only time that we see them. So a little bit of a warning, heads up, don't flame me. So it's all good. We have a very good communal type of neighborhood where we discuss things with each other, and we're very open about all the different things that might be taking place in the neighborhood. So, anyways, to the quad, 1S I think it has a big draw because you can get really good performance out of something that is so light, and with that low weight and reduced speed, you get a little bit of extra safety. You're not likely to hurt anyone, or very least not hurt them very badly. I suppose in a worst case scenario, if someone were to catch a prop right in their eye, that might not be a good thing. But I think the potential for that is so very, very low. And 1S tends to be a little less expensive, especially in the battery department. And so those things are big draws, and I think in general they're also less expensive from a build standpoint. But of course that depends on whether you're comparing a ready to fly or if you're doing something else. So this is Bob's latest creation from FPV Cycle, and he's got a blog posting on his site about the build. There is one little catch